Okay, let's change gears a little bit. Let's see if I can get myself banned on YouTube. Um, let's talk about Trump.
Okay.
Did Trump win? Trump won, yes or no?
Trump won the 2020 presidential election. Now, if we're playing by YouTube's rules, we have to display both sides, right? We have to say,
Right.
yeah, Trump won in 2020. But on the other hand, Democrats and fact checkers say that Trump didn't win in 2020.
Everybody, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I know it's been a while, but things have really taken a turn as far as politics go, and I really wanted to bring on my next guest to sort through all the madness and really decide what is for us as conservatives or the right side of politics and what isn't. And I didn't think that there was a better person to do this than our next guest. She is the editor-in-chief at Right Side Broadcasting Network, and she's the founder of The Republican Girl. She's also a Turning Point USA ambassador and everything else under the sun. But Grace Saldana, thank you so much for being here.
Need to be here.
For sure. I know there was some back and forth. I mean, both of us have been traveling like crazy, so it's been cool. So first thing I want to do is kind of open this up on like a broad topic and really just like kind of let you talk about what your general beliefs are, right? So there's a kind of a new movement of populism, I'll say, since the Trump era of conservative politics that really isn't necessarily a small government idea. It's more so about what the government is doing. What's your opinion on that? What do you see? I know you've talked to everybody from Matt Gaetz to, James O'Keefe and everybody in between. So what are you seeing out there? What can you tell us about this kind of new wave of populism, and what are your personal?
Well, all I can tell you is the experience that I have being on the campaign trail, going to Trump rallies, talking to people on the ground. Because as you know, what a lot of what Right Side Broadcasting does is we connect with the people. We're not there to do a 5-minute hit. We're there to show the crowd, show what's going on, talk to people who live in these cities and states and are affected by the Democrats' policies. So what I'm seeing is a huge populist movement that is swinging towards limited government. I think there's different clashes going on. So I think I understand what you mean in the way that you're saying it, in that there's like some people are leaning towards limited government, and some people would call that conservative. But there's a lot of different conservative factions. So it's very interesting to see where it's headed, and I don't think we exactly know yet. I think this year and next year, we're going to see a lot of the trajectory of the conservative movement. Are they going to stick by Trump? Are they going to go off into a different direction? We'll see what happens. My personal opinion is that we are going to continue moving towards limited government. The more the Democrats, you can kind of look at the Biden administration as a blessing in disguise. And I say that because
That's a first, yeah.
It's a first. I'm a half glass full person, and I never want to be too negative, but I think it's a blessing in disguise, because the more the Democrats do, the more people get turned off by their policies. The more lockdowns they implement, the more they push vaccines, the more people question, why is the government pushing this on me? Why do they not want me to have a choice? So I think the more that people are affected by these policies, the better it is for the future of America.
I love that. I think it's interesting to hear people who have some sort of, I guess, influence on the right talk about the divide that's happening, right? Because on the one hand of the argument, you can say, like, we really need to band together. We need to all, like, stop the petty fighting. But then there is legitimate disagreement within the right side of politics that really does matter. And I talked about this on James Dunn's podcast, Done Right. He's part of TPUSA as well. And we were kind of discussing, like, in order for the conservative movement to kind of move forward, there has to be some sort of consensus about how we feel towards government and how we feel towards just the way the country wants to run in general. Right? For example, the idea of small government, limited government just leaves us alone. That's kind of a fight that I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's kind of a fight that we've already lost, right? And I think that now it's kind of, time has kind of come for people in the government or for people who are pushing politicians to really say, hey, if you're not going to leave us alone, then at least use the government to our advantage and make us more free in the process. What do you think about that appeal, and do you think that that's even feasible for us?
Well, I do think that, that's the main difference between the Democrat Party and the Republican Party, conservative and liberal. The Democrat Party is about government expansion. They want to expand government programs. They want to add more money to the government, pay themselves more, do whatever they do. And then Republicans want to limit government. Still have their positions, of course, in the establishment and all that. It's such a complex issue, and it's difficult to boil it down into like a couple minute response or a 40-minute podcast. But I think that's the main difference. And the biggest struggle the Republican Party is going to see is going to be on a moral divide or religious divide between conservatives. Because there's a difference between being a Republican and being a religious conservative. And that's the split that a lot of people are seeing right now, especially like when you talk about who's the best candidate to replace Gavin Newsom in the recall election. Is it Caitlyn Jenner, or is it Larry Elder? Is it Kevin Kiley? Who is it? And a lot of people can't get behind Caitlyn Jenner because obviously the transgender issue. And a lot of people also say, no, that's where the Republican Party needs to go. We need to be more accepting of that because the Republican Party isn't about excluding people, right? There's like a lot of different things happening, and it's very difficult to boil it down.
I've even heard, to jump on that point, I've even heard some people not be fans of Larry Elder because he was okay with gay marriage, which I think is kind of like, all right, we can't have everything in a candidate. Jesus himself isn't going to come down and run for office. So I think that's a little much, but I do 100% agree. And I've been talking about this more and more now, but that line of moralism is where the right seems to kind of fragment, right? It's the religious right, the conservative moralists versus the fiscal conservative small government people. And I kind of consider myself in the former, right, with being a Christian and everything. And I think that there needs to be acceptance. There needs to be room for people who do want to be fiscally conservative and just don't necessarily care about religion and stuff like that. But I do think there has to be a fundamental understanding of like where our country's values and morals come from and how respected Christianity needs to be. I'm glad you brought that up. What are your opinions as far as religion goes? Are you a religious person? Are you spiritual? Anything under the sun?
Yes, I am a religious person. I'm Christian. I was raised Christian. I personally pursue that. And I think I would like to say that I believe in separation of church and state. I don't believe in the government governing based off of religious rules. But to that point, that all laws are based on some sort of morality, right? So obviously it's illegal to murder someone. It's illegal to steal. You can't do these. These are crimes. These are moral crimes. And the reason why they're illegal is because of a religious foundation that we once had. I would say that we don't necessarily stick to that anymore.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Judeo-Christian values, and a lot of leftists will try to say that we weren't, but we were. And unfortunately, we've kind of drifted away from that. But I'm seeing an interesting shift, I think, especially among younger conservatives. A lot of them aren't necessarily religious per se, but they are very conservative still, like even morally. They don't believe certain things are right, and maybe they don't know why they think that, but I do see an interesting trend towards...
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's so interesting. So I have a younger cousin who's 18 and then a younger cousin that's 16, and they're kind of like who I go to as I guess a microcosm of Gen Z and everything that kids are into, right? They're the ones that inform me of like, I don't know, Full Send and all these little things that Gen Z does. And what I've noticed is that their ideas on leftism are kind of the same way that we looked at conservatism, or me as a millennial looked at conservatism when I was younger. It's like that stupid old people stuff. That's make-believe. That's fairy tale land. And they almost despise the idea of like, of this progressivism just for the sake of progressivism. And they hold tight to traditional values more so because they see that it works. Right? It's just like these things naturally work. That's just how it's always been. And there's almost a realism despite what they're being taught in school. What are you seeing? You go to a lot of events. You're at all of these places with a lot of young conservatives. What are you seeing that is most intriguing you about Gen Z and where the future of conservatism is going?
I see a lot of enthusiasm in Gen Z, which is interesting because usually younger people are not enthusiastic about politics at all. And if they are interested in it, then they're seen as like the dorky types, whatever. But it's become very mainstream. And I'm not personally a TikTok user because I don't like the idea of the Chinese government having any sort of access to any of my private information. I'm a very private person. And so for that reason, I don't use TikTok. Otherwise, I would. But I know that a lot of famous TikTokers on there are conservative. A lot of high school girls on there are making conservative videos about abortion and the pro-life movement and all of that. So I do see a very interesting, it's become kind of cool to be a conservative. And I think we see that happening through Turning Point a lot as well. Turning Point is the first organization to tell you that Gen Z is free. And they believe that that Generation Z is going to be one of the most conservative generations we've seen in a very long time. And if you look at history, it seems like every 10 years, it kind of flips. So every 10 years, you'll have a more liberal generation, which is what the millennials were. And they were children of the 90s, the late 80s. And they were very like hippie-ish, just kind of like raving, free, whatever.
I can speak to that personally for sure.
Yeah.
I was a big hippie growing up for sure.
You were?
Yeah. Oh yeah. John Lennon, Imagine, the whole 9 yards,
Yeah. See, it was so trendy to kind of be into that kind of music. And the previous generation, the 80s, and people born in the early 80s and late 70s were more conservative. And it keeps flipping back and forth. So I think the next flip we're going to see is conservative. And I hope that future generations, especially of the Hispanic population, will start voting towards Republicans.
I love that you brought up, Hispanic America, because it's something that I care a lot about. Growing up, when I was kind of made fun of a little bit, I guess you could say, from my family members, because when they'd ask me like, "Oh, are you Peruvian?" or whatever, I'd be like, "No, I'm American." And they'd be like, "What are you talking about? You're Peruvian, your parents were born there," and they'd like get mad at me. But there's an acceptance for people who consider themselves American because they're born here, they're raised here, whatever the case may be. And there's just a lack of realization in Hispanic America, particularly where I am in the Northeast, in like New York, New Jersey, that they see the blue collar, working class, hardworking people as Democrats. Always have been. Their parents vote Democrat. It's just what they do. They don't question it at all. What needs to change in order for like Hispanic America to see this isn't the working class party anymore, if it ever was, and really populism is where they need to place their vote, whether that's Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, or somebody local?
Well, I'm still trying to find the solution to this problem that we have in the Hispanic community, which is low voter turnout, and when they do turn out, they usually vote for Democrats more often than not, especially in specific Hispanic communities such as the Mexican community. They more often vote Democrat. Maybe the Cubans and Venezuelans might vote more Republican. But of course, you can't generalize the entire Hispanic community because they all have different issues culturally.
Yeah.
But I think I don't know the answer. And like I said, I'm still exploring it. But I think what we need more of is GOP outreach and people explaining to them what their platform is and be on the same level. I think a lot of Republicans get so focused on being this famous figure, this great talker, great speaker, this Reagan-esque person, this Trump-esque person. But that's not necessarily what relates to the average Joe. The person who may just live next door in a middle-class neighborhood and they have their kids in middle school next door, I don't know. And that person isn't necessarily going to relate with the big extravagant personality. So I think we need people who can go down to those communities and explain what their platform is, why they should vote for them, and I don't think we have enough of that.
I 100% agree. It's funny because some of the most politically neutral, passive people when it comes to these things, who just go to work, have their families, raise their families, they tend to be more conservative people, but they just don't care to vote. And they don't care to engage in politics, which is, I think, why Republicans continue to lose elections, because they don't engage the average person, right? They'll engage, the Gen Z, CPAC, SAS crowd, but they won't engage, the 30-something father of two that lives in Georgia or lives in Virginia. And to me, I think that's a huge gap in the connection between the truth about conservatism and actually getting the country back to a place where we value traditional values. I want to ask you some controversial questions. Is that okay?
Sure.
All right, cool. Let's start with the one that's on everybody's mind right now, that everybody's talking about, the vaccine. Take it or leave it.
I think this. I think if you think it's best for you, if you have 2+ pre-existing conditions, if you're elderly, you should get the vaccine. I'm not going to make that decision for you, but if you decide you want to get it, then you should. Because that's what vaccines are for. I'm not anti-vax, but I am anti-mandatory vax. And I personally would not take it because it's experimental. Maybe if the FDA approved it, maybe I'd consider it. But I was also raised to be more aware of Big Pharma and their intentions. And my family never had the best opinion of them. So I was not raised taking vaccines every year, taking the flu shot. I only have the mandatory vaccines you need to get when you're like 4 years old to go to public school. And I had one shot in 10th grade, the Tdap shot for some other flu that was mandatory for public schools. So it is not, in a sense, a new concept to mandate vaccines in that sense in public schools, but I don't agree that we should be mandating it nationwide or to federal workers or to the U.S. military, which is what they announced today, that all military members are going to have to get it by September 15th, and I think that's absolutely ridiculous. So I think it's a personal choice. Personally, I won't get it. But
I think I was talking to somebody a couple days ago, and they were talking about where this ends and what possible more roads can we go down to avoid having to take this vaccine. And I think that's the big problem. You know, a lot of people like yourself and even myself say, you know, it should be a personal decision. We shouldn't mandate it. But what happens when they do mandate it? You know, and what happens when, for example, like I'm assuming my company or your company wouldn't mandate and force us to take vaccines because it's part of the culture of the company. But for those that are working at a Google or those that are working at some random online company that now are forcing them to take a vaccine, where does this end? Does it end with, you know, vaccine passports and all this stuff? I know it's impossible for you to say for sure, but in your vision, in your expertise, where does this go from here?
Well, I think that in a sense, so I have two opinions. One opinion is that it could go this way. They could mandate everybody to get the vaccine. They're looking into it. Biden has said they're not sure if it's going to be legal to mandate that everyone in America gets the vaccine, but they are looking into it, which is disturbing in itself that they want that level of control for a 99.97% survival rate virus. And it's not like it's the bubonic plague or it's, you know, chicken pox, I don't know, something crazy
Right.
like that. But I mean, it's kind of weird that they're pushing this so hard, and I hope that people just don't comply. And I can't think of another time in history, correct me if I'm wrong, if you can think of something, that they've mandated something on a mass scale like this and it worked. And,
Right. Well, yeah, it's the whole idea of like the minute you tell somebody they have to do something, they no longer want to do it, right? And so it got creepy to me when the people started offering free donuts, and you know, you were seeing vaccines getting. I live like close to like a relatively hood area, right? I'll say hood. People were literally setting up folding tables on the corners of these inner cities with little glass things in front of them and giving people the vaccine on the side of the street. That to me was like when I was like, this is real and it's not a conspiracy anymore, and I don't know what to do about it. You know, so yeah, to your point, it's insane.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know that they'll be successful with it. But again, you know, we're living in unprecedented times. That's the only thing I keep referring back to. Is normally I would say, oh, no, it won't happen. Nobody will ever completely get the vaccine. Like, there's lots of rules that people don't actually listen to. Mm-hmm. But had they not shut down pretty much most of the country last year and did this whole defund the police movement, riots, things are just so crazy and hostile right now that I'm worried that they might actually do it.
Right. Okay, let's change gears a little bit. Let's see if I can get myself banned on YouTube. Let's talk about Trump.
Okay.
Did Trump win? Trump won, yes or no?
Trump won the 2020 presidential election. Now, if we're playing by YouTube's rules, we have to display both sides, right? We have to say,
right.
Yeah, Trump won in 2020. But on the other hand, Democrats and fact checkers say that Trump didn't win in 2020. So there's your YouTube disclaimer.
Thank you. You saved my life.
I honestly do think he won. I think that there was widespread election fraud. I think it's obvious. I think a lot of people know it. Even leftist magazines like The Atlantic have somewhat admitted to it and stated that here are the 8 architects behind the 2020 election. And
bragging about it.
About how they stole it. Like, it doesn't get more obvious than that. Plus, all of the countless of examples in Maricopa County, in Georgia, in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. The list goes on, and I personally think California was stolen. I think it was a red election. But yeah, I'm convinced, and I don't need the DOJ to investigate it to tell me that. I wish they would, but I think the fact that the Supreme Court, the DOJ, plenty of states refuse to look at evidence, the mountainous evidence, tens of thousands of examples, that tells us something if they refuse to look at it.
I think one of the problems is, and this is something I've been thinking about because, this question keeps coming up every time I talk to somebody who agrees with me about this, like you do. If it is true that there is voter fraud, which I do believe, and if it is true that it was enough to overturn the election, what can even be done about it? If it's so unprecedented, it's never happened in history. What do you do? Is there any kind of law in place or anything like that would kind of lead us into doing things properly if that was the case? Now that Biden's already been sworn in, he's at his first year of presidency, what can we possibly do?
If I'm being honest, I'm like a half glass full person. I hate to be pessimistic, but I think that the rule of law in this country has already lost so much weight that nothing can be done. I mean, the fact that nothing happened between November 8th and January 20th tells us everything we need to know about the federal government, the establishment, the courts. The courts are supposed to serve justice, and they did not. They literally did not do their job.
Right.
And they didn't even attempt to do their job. They ignored it purposefully so that we would sweep this under the rug and that Biden would get in, and then everything would go back to the normal establishment ways that it used to be. So unfortunately, I don't think that anything will come of this, and I don't think that, I'm not sure that we have a lot of hope for the future in that regard. I hope we win in 2022. I'm optimistic that we will because there's such a populist movement. I think the only thing that could possibly outweigh the election fraud that happened is if mass amounts of people came out and vote. But
right.
We don't have that kind of turnout right now.
That's the interesting thing to me, right? Because going into 2016, before Trump was the phenomenon he is now, it was interesting because nobody I knew really wanted to vote for him. Almost nobody even cared to vote at all. And to me, it was really like an extra surprising moment in 2020 when most of the people around me had come around to the idea of not only Trump, but Trumpism, populism, and making politics kind of a mainstream issue. And so this is completely subjective, and it's my personal experience, which I hate to say, but like just using that as reference, I'm not sure if it's me as somebody that does this for a living, that is involved in politics and journalism for a living. Is it us that we're just surrounded in a bubble? Is it maybe, if we step outside our bubbles, nobody really cares that much? Or that bothers me a little bit. What do you think?
I think about that too, because I remember a time where I didn't work in politics, and I've always been into politics since I was very young, but I didn't get truly involved in actually participating in activism until 2016. But I remember where I worked at a gym, I'll say. I won't say which one or who I worked with, but I had lots of coworkers who loved Trump, lots of coworkers who hated Trump. And there is such an interesting divide there, but I guarantee that if you ask those same people now, a lot of them would have moved towards the right just based off of the level of psychoticness we've seen from the Democrats last year. Because I don't think people want to agree with a side that actively promotes violence against white people, against police officers. They might write a little post on Facebook to do a little virtue signaling to save their friends. But at the end of the day, I don't think people actually support those kinds of things. And even the numbers in the 2020 election among Hispanics in South Florida show you that they are coming around to President Trump. I think he gained, I don't quote me exactly on this, but I think he gained 10% of their
Yeah.
vote additional.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I think that tells you right there that people are coming around.
I agree. I think what you brought up about the defund the police movement is interesting because I'm in New Jersey, and I have a lot of friends that are in the police force, and a lot of friends that consider the police force to be a blue collar job, and they think that or they thought that is like you're serving the people, you're part of the community, therefore you're a Democrat, and these union Democrats, right, blue dog Democrats. Over the last couple years, the last few years, with the increasing craziness of the left's delusion, not only about police and abolishing all police, but with gender and with ideology and with forcing people to learn CRT in schools, I've seen so many police officers go from being Democrat to being conservative, yet somehow the police union as a whole is still blue. And that to me just shows the amount of corruption that's in our government, because in order, I don't, maybe you can explain this to me more than I would know, but from my understanding, in order to be part of a union, you have to display your voting record. You have to show whether you vote blue or you vote red. And so there's a lot of pressure on these everyday police officers to continue to vote blue, because if they don't, they're going to get flack from their bosses who are tied to, let's say, de Blasio or tied to Cuomo, and they need those unions to stay blue. Do you know anything about that? Does that make sense at all, or am I being conspiracy theorist?
I actually don't know a lot about that, about how they keep record of who they voted for. I find it a little bit difficult to believe because most of the police officers and firefighters that I've known, I have always been very, very conservative.
Well, firefighters are different.
Yep, firefighters are different, but
Yeah.
we'll stick to just police officers. I've known a lot of them because San Diego is actually a huge law enforcement military community, and so is Orange County, where I worked. And they were all conservative. They all very pro-America, love God, love country. I mean, I would find it hard to believe. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but that's my personal opinion.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's kind of half of my point, right? The fact that you could be pro-America, love God, and love your country, up until maybe 2016, you could do that and still be a Democrat. Nowadays it's like, if you love your country, if you love the place that you've chosen to live, you're considered a white supremacist, Nazi, neoliberal or whatever. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I digress that point. I just thought it was an interesting, point to talk to. I want to get into a little bit, because I know you have, aside from RSBN, you have personal things going on. The Republican Girl. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is, what you're planning on doing with it, what you are doing with it? Just kind of give us the whole spiel.
Sure. So I started the Republican Girl about a year ago, a little bit over a year ago. And I started it because I started thinking about when I got involved in politics. And because even now, even as a political person with all the connections that I have, I still find it difficult to find a lot of good information on how to be involved in politics. Whenever I've tried to look it up for someone else and like help them out and say, oh, you can go to this place to volunteer for a pro-life cause, or you can do this. A lot of places, either they don't have chapters started up where conservatives can actively volunteer, or there's just a lack of information online. So I started the Republican Girl really to bring conservative girls together, regardless of age and really regardless of exact political beliefs. You don't have to be a Republican to join the page. You can be conservative, you can be Christian. I have all kinds of girls who follow my page, and they pretty much follow for inspiration from like-minded women and also for the resources. So every now and again, when I can, this is not my full-time commitment, so I'm not able to do it a lot of the time, but whenever I see something, like whether it's a Students for Life rally or a Turning Point event, something like that, then I will post it, and I always offer in my stories to help them out, and I'll try to research for them if they need it, to see how they can get involved, because a lot of people, that's the main question I would get, being a correspondent with RSBN. I would go around and talk to people all the time. They say, well, how can I get more involved? What can I do? And, people don't have all day to volunteer to political causes and really just be that Republican spokesperson, but a lot of people do have a little time. They'd like to give back and do something that they're passionate about. And I just don't think there's resources out there available for that, which is why I started the Republican Girl.
That's such a great point. That's one of the questions that I asked myself when I first started thinking like maybe politics could be something that I get involved in full time. Where do
Mhm.
I start? How do I get started? Who do I talk to? I know I can't jump from being, a passive, a listener of Ben Shapiro all the way to being a correspondent, but there has to be intermediary steps. So the Republican Girl seems to be something that's entry level focused for women who want to get more involved in the political world. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's fair to say I like to promote other conservative organizations, whether they're women's organizations. Like there's one, it's called New Enlightened Women,
Hmm.
and they have a lot of clubs on Florida's college campuses. So I'll promote their events, and whenever I can, and whenever I come across them, I'll post events for conservative women to get involved in, because I know a lot of them have a lot of passion, and we need to be able to mobilize this movement that is starting right now. And that's one of my biggest complaints about the GOP is that they don't do enough grassroots. They don't help people enough and help them figure it out. So the left is way better at us than that, and we need to lead that charge.
That's an interesting point, and I want to touch on this and maybe a couple other things, and we'll call it quits. But the idea that the left is way better at utilizing their base drives me insane, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you can go anywhere and get a leftist talking point. You can go to Netflix, you can go to Google, like anywhere that you look culturally, you can put on a rap album, and you will get leftist values from that. What does the right have that's even close to that? And in my opinion, nothing really. I mean, we have a few MAGA rap artists. We have, things like Turning Point, and we have, a few CPAC maybe. But those are great things. But we don't have anything that fits into the mainstream culture. What do you see anything, or am I missing something?
I think the only thing that fits, in a sense, is a Trump rally. Because
Okay.
loved or hated, it's mainstream, it's culture now. People know what it is. They know what kinds of people go there. And I think that's the GOP relies so much on Trump for their base,
Yeah.
which they
Oh
need
yeah.
to stop doing so much. I love Trump, but we need to get on our own 2 feet. He's not in office right now. We need to come to terms with that, and we need to get better. We learned a lot from Trump. He's tried to teach us in the GOP a lot of lessons about how to get things done, how to get rally support, how to do things, and we need to use that information and that knowledge.
Well,
So
yeah, he's the godfather of populism at this point, right? And I
he's the
think,
kingmaker, the
yeah,
godfather of populism.
kingmaker, 100%. It's interesting to see what's going to happen now because Trump has found a way to resonate with the general public like no other Republican and no other conservative has. I would say not even a politician has, probably since John F. Kennedy, right? And so it's going to be fun to see what happens there. I had another question for you, but it slipped my mind. Anyway, I wanted to take this kind of podcast and not only make it informational, but I want to give people like access to what your come up was like, right? So I love that the Republican Girl is about that. I had no idea that that's exactly what it was. If you could give somebody who's maybe younger watching this and they want to get more involved, just like the first 3 steps onto like how to get more involved in politics, how to become a correspondent or get involved in a company, what would you say are those initial 3 things that they, first of all, prerequisites that they have to have, and then second of all, actions to take
For a young person,
for a young person?
a college student.
Yeah, let's say a college student, maybe a senior in high school who's like, what am I going to do with my life?
Yeah. Okay. So, I ask because it depends. Of course, it depends on demographic, but I think the best 3 things a young college student or senior in high school could do to get involved in politics would, 1, check the clubs at your school, because that's going to be your closest point of access to anything, to the outside world, right? Someone who's already started it. So why not use that resource? If you have a Turning Point campus, a club, a college Republicans club, YAF, even y'all, even if you're not a libertarian, like go to that club, find the connection, see if there's upcoming events around you, because more than likely it'll lead you to other people who know more information. So it's all about your connections and people that you know. So that I would do that. I would also find, if you're interested in media, which is what I do, like work for free. I hate to tell people that because it sucks to work for free. Nobody wants to do it. But if you don't have any experience and this is truly your passion, then this is what you want to do in life, you need to find an online media outlet or something that you can even just start writing for, get your foot in the door, add it to your resume so that you can get that better job that you want. And number 3, make sure you're super knowledgeable. When we hire people for our website to write, we always hire people who are experienced in politics, whether they're majoring in government or they have already worked in a media company and they know what they're doing. We want you to have that kind of experience. So there's plenty of leadership seminars online through Leadership Institute actually has online journalism, how to get a job in conservatism. They have so many online $20 courses where they'll literally just give you resources to help you get started in the conservative movement, no matter what you want to do, if it's video editing, podcasting, writing, whatever. So there's so many resources out there, and I hope you guys just do enough research to take advantage of them.
I love that. And the point that you made about working for free, I think is something that should be doubled down on, because that's one of the things that I've experienced most. I started as a marketer, and that's what I was doing for probably 10 years before I even thought about doing politics. But one of the things that's just true, regardless of what industry you're in, you want to work for free with the intention to network and with the intention to give value to somebody that they may need and not have to feel like they need to pay you, right? And once you can do that for somebody, it's almost putting them in a position where they're not indebted to you, but they're grateful to you to the point where they'll give you a connection, or they'll give you somebody else to talk to, or continue to feed into whatever it is that you want to do. But I would say on top of that, not only is working for free important, but knowing the specific avenue that you want to work in. For me, it's, videography, production, all that stuff. Narrow down your specialty list to something very super specific, and I think that'll help as well. So just adding to that because it's so important.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's it's similar to what I did. All the steps that I recommended are things that I did myself. I first started out, I was in college. We didn't have any conservative groups on campus, but I was watching the news. I was watching Fox, and I saw a student action summit with Turning Point. And I said, what's that organization called? Turning Point? I need to look that up and see what it's all about. What if they have an upcoming event in Arizona or in Texas or somewhere that's close to me, because I lived in San Diego. And turns out they had the Young Women's Leadership Summit in Dallas. So that was my first Turning Point event that I did 2 years ago. And I went to that event, and I networked with people, and I talked to a guy named Oscar. He was the field rep in San Diego for Turning Point. And he said, well, we don't have any clubs on your campus, but you can start one yourself, and I'll give you all the resources. We'll bring a bunch of signs and stickers, and all you have to do is stand out there and talk to students. And so I started doing that, and I started talking to students, and I created my club. I networked with the Y'all Club, and I just slowly grew my connections. And through Turning Point, I met a girl named Jamie who co-founded a small online news company called Scriber. And so I started contributing to that for free. And so I was just writing my opinions on things. You guys can go read my old opinions. I can't guarantee I still have them, but they're there on Chick-fil-A or anything else. See, woke Chick-fil-A, I don't know. So, there's that kind of stuff that I did. And then from Scriber, at one point I had 6 months of experience writing there. I had started a Turning Point chapter. Then I went to OAN. OAN was in San Diego, and that's where they're headquartered. And I applied there, and I started working as a news writer there. And then from there was another opportunity. So you just have to go out there and network. That's what I did.
I love that. I think that it's an interesting time right now for those that are watching that are looking to get jobs in conservatism, because I was talking to my boss about this a couple days ago. There's a bifurcation of the American economy happening along party lines. So there is more jobs available within conservatism. They may be a little bit lower paying. They may require a little bit more elbow grease at first, but there's more jobs available now because of the cancel culture that the left has pushed. It's forced people out of the general job market and into an isolated job market where now we have to create our own things. And so RSBN is a product of that, in my opinion. Right. A lot of these places are popping up and becoming more. Newsmax is a product of that. And so it's really a great time to start digging in roots and saying, I want to be in this industry. I want to be involved in this and start building a portfolio that caters to that. Because this is interesting, but my portfolio before politics was very neutral. It had zero politics, zero religion. Now it's like all MAGA hats and like all filled with like Bibles and like all that, because I know that the people I want to work for will think that that's okay, and the people that I don't want to work for will find that repulsive and never hire me in the first place. I'm kind of, burning the boats, but at the same time, I think it's a good thing because it gives you a specific target and it keeps you focused.
Yeah, I like that because I always use that line of logic for friends. It's like if they don't like what I stand for, if they hate it, if they don't like Christianity, they don't like politics, then they're not for me.
Yeah.
You don't need that friend. You don't need that job that's gonna because it's gonna be soul crushing at some point. You can't work for Google and have all these conflicts with their policies and their censorship. That's going to be really difficult on you at some point. So you might as well work for like a conservative startup, and that's something that I could talk about too forever. But talking about how conservatives need to start making their own things.
Yeah.
Like a new Facebook or alternative like Getter for Twitter. Things like that. We need to start making our own industries. We need to start making our own movies, our own shows. The funding is out there.
Yes.
And that's what Republicans have always been, the party that made a ton of money from big donors and all that. So there's no reason why we can't be being more innovative. We need to use the ideas that we love so much, like free enterprise, innovation, free markets, to take advantage of that and compete with the other companies.
That's so spot on. Like we are the party of the free market. Let's create our own free market, engage with ourselves, and become whatever it is that we're trying to fight against, or become better than whatever it is we're trying to fight against. So I love the talk about big tech and just the startup nature of where that's going, right? I love that there's Getter and there's Gab and Parler and all these things. Which one do you think has the most legs, in your opinion? Or I don't know if you can answer that if you have any ties to any of them. I know Rumble is big for you guys, so I don't want.
Rumble is big for us. I think right now we're kind of seeing like the infancy of a new wave of upcoming platforms that are actually good with user interface. They have all the same features as platforms like YouTube does, and monetization wise, and creator-friendly tools and things like that. So I can't really stick to one specific platform because, as you know, they change all the time. Like just like with what happened with Parler,
yeah,
and with Clubhouse, which they just kind of like lost popularity out of nowhere. Things get trendy for a hot minute, and if the companies don't adapt and grow with the popularity, then they can lose their base just as quickly as they got it. And so I think it's kind of difficult to say which one. I can't put all my eggs in one basket, but I
have opinions, so don't worry.
Okay, good.
Yeah, for me, it's interesting because I think what the success was for Facebook and Instagram and Twitter was that they were willing to make huge changes to their user interface instantaneously without warning people and almost force them to comply. Like when Instagram took away likes or when Facebook started charging for ads, stuff like that. They didn't really care about what the user, they cared about the user experience. They didn't care about the user opinion, right? And I think that ended up being the double-edged sword. But, I think that we need a little bit of that energy with, Getter and Gab and all these things, because I gotta be honest, I tried to be a Parler guy. I tried, and the user interface just killed me. Like I went to school for graphic design, and that's my background for college. So I'm looking at Parler and I'm like, why is this the one? Why is this our Twitter? Like the user interface is slow. The type is too big. Everything looks clunky. And so I just had all these thoughts, but I definitely agree with you that ultimately, the good ones will rise to the top, and it's important to, like, if you're involved in that kind of work, there's space regardless of where you are, whether you're in coding or design or video production. There's space in this kind of conservative economy for you. So I love that. I think that's such an interesting topic for sure. I do want to leave a little room for you, not that you even need it, but for you to plug whatever it is that you're doing, what you're planning on doing. Maybe there's something going on with RSBN that you want to talk about. Plug away. Let us know where we can find you.
Okay, so the first thing I want to plug actually is Right Side Broadcasting Network, because we have been working really hard on building up our website. So not only are we covering rallies and events, but we're also doing online news. So you guys can now access any firsthand Trump related news, whether it's a rally or whether it's news relating to him or Ron DeSantis or the GOP, election fraud. We have all of those topics covered on our website on rsbnetwork.com. So if you guys want to head there and check out our articles, give us some feedback, we would love to hear that. And you guys can find me on Grace Saldana. That's my personal page on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Everything is GraceSaldanaa. And any ladies who are interested in following the Republican Girl or joining our group chat or finding more resources, message me on The Republican Girl. It's exactly how it sounds, The Republican Girl on Instagram and Facebook. So thanks for giving me that opportunity to shout out those handles.
Of course. Yes, girls, if you're watching, make sure to join that. That's an amazing community. It needs to be, it needs to continue to grow. It needs to continue to flourish. So please do that. Please follow her. By the way, any relation to Zoe?
Zoe, no, she's Puerto Rican. I'm Mexican, so.
Okay, I'm sure you've heard that before. I just want to slip that in there. All right, thank you so much, Grace, for coming on and just giving me some of your time and some of your experience and wisdom. You're always welcome back on the show whenever you want to plug something, whatever you want to do. But thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much.
All right, talk to you soon. Stick around. I'm going to stop recording.